Well, we're finally here doing a review that deviates just a little bit from the Godzilla movies, just for a second. I didn't want to go ahead and disregard King Kong due to the fact I've talked about him so much since the Godzilla vs. King Kong 1962 review. I felt like maybe it'd just be okay to go ahead and talk about King Kong and even the movie that came out in '86. So we're going to go ahead and start here with King Kong. And if you are curious, chances are down the road as a bonus video, I will go ahead and do the 1933 movie. But that'll be down the line though, because obviously we started this in 1954 with the original Godzilla movie, so there's no sense to go back right now. Just a year prior, Godzilla won his break but was still very much present with new ideas that were being pitched, none of which came through. 1976, though, was the year the 8th Wonder of the World would make his monumental appearance, in his first appearance since 1967. But overall, it was the first solo King Kong movie that just wasn't associated with Toho since 1933. 43 years, Kong had waited for his re-imaging and his brand new remake. This movie, unlike the original one, which favored its then time as 1933, it favors 1976 rather than going ahead and just setting it back as the other one was in 1933. This could have been partially due to the fact that probably because of the fact that would have ran the budget up just a bit more, and they would have had to go back and kind of create, old school sets and make sure everything looked accurate and have all the old school cars that were around in 1933. Yeah, stuff like that would have been a little costly. In this movie, there were some issues when it came to the budget and why certain things were cut, and I'll go ahead and talk about that more later. But obviously right here, we have 1976. Now, obviously for New York, I want to go ahead and say there have been lots of changes, especially to the skyline, due to the fact the Empire State Building was no longer the king of the skyline by the time the year 1976. You see, in 1966, groundbreaking construction began of the Twin Towers and would be completed in 1971. They were the new champions of the sky. The Big Apple had a new champion of the skyline. So let's talk about King Kong 1976, shall we? That's why we're here. Okay, this movie is a mixed bag of emotions for me. There's certain things I like about it, but I feel like it doesn't do full justice as a remake. And here's the thing, before I go any further, I know people could say, well, it's an older movie, you kinda gotta give it a break, and there's certain things I will give it a break on, honestly. But it just does not feel like it could be the actual justice that was needed for a modern day King Kong movie. Certain aspects that very well could have been in this movie were kind of lost and left out, and there were certain things they really didn't need to do in this movie. I don't know, it just doesn't feel like the epic journey into the unknown. This movie begins with the mysterious stowaway known as Jack Prescott, played by Jeff Bridges. You know, the Big Lebowski, the dude. The ironic part is his future co-star would go ahead and have an eventual encounter with King Kong as well, John Goodman that is. Okay, so you're probably wondering, what's with the ship's journey in the first place? Like, what are we doing here? So we got large oil deposits this ship is searching for, which is believed to exist in large amounts on a hidden island. This hidden island we know as Skull Island, though I'll go ahead and say that I don't believe this movie ever refers to it as Skull Island once in this movie. I watched this movie and I could not find it. Maybe I missed a part, but as far as I know, nope. We find Dwan on a raft, who is our character, obviously our woman that King Kong is going to end up kidnapping and walking away with after she's offered as a sacrifice. And that will create some journey and, tension possibly in this movie, because that's what King Kong movies kind of got to do, except for Skull Island, which decided, hey, we're not going to do that because we have other plans. Let's just go ahead and say that. This movie, though, is just one of those movies that kind of continues that classic trend, when it comes to King Kong movies. So we have not just one, but two people on this ship that weren't supposed to be even going along in this expedition in the first place. But movie's got a movie, and we got to go and take the one onto the island, even though it probably would have been a wise idea to keep her on the ship by any means necessary, because a lot could have been avoided. But we got to have that scene where the natives see her, and they're like, hey, we want her, we'll go ahead and do trade, we'll trade 6 of us for her, just because of the fact they want to go ahead and make a sacrifice, and eventually they're just kind of ignored, and they scare off the natives, and go back to the ship and kind of just redraw the plans of what they're going to go ahead and do, because the natives exist in the area right where the oil deposits are supposed to be. I find this to be really amusing because boy do these natives, once they see her and they know where the ship is, they just somehow know where it is and they just paddle out right to it. And they literally, they paddle right to it and just grab her, literally just straight a paddle by and just take her. Now this is kind of silly because I feel like Jack is a character that's supposed to be of some intelligence due to the fact that he knows what's going on, he knows there's something on the island that they're worshipping, even though our cast and characters have not seen King Kong by this point. And of course it's kind of just thrown off and kind of pushed away by our baddies that, yeah, this is just some crazy religion that they have on this island, whatever, this isn't real, there's no giant ape, no giant gorilla, whatever, So none of that feels like a possibility, but Jack doesn't decide to keep, Dwan next to him. That way he can go ahead and keep her safe, or keep her within the ship just in case these natives feel like they gotta go ahead and get on the ship and literally just kidnap her. Like, they literally have no problem kidnapping her. Like, their job is cut out for them. Regardless, this has to happen, and we get our build-up for King Kong's grand arrival, which is built up pretty damn well. Before we get our first look at King Kong, though, I gotta go ahead and say I love how the music builds and then after that it just drops. The sound effects tell all the story, from King Kong's breathing to Duan's screaming. It's the small, subtle things that I absolutely love in these old 70s movies, and art that's kind of lost in modern day filming. Just kind of drop that music and with the sound effects tell the story. This movie does that brilliantly. But for every positive, though, there's a negative, and this movie has a negative I gotta go ahead and shoot on. So King Kong and Duan's relationship between each other, it just doesn't click for me. Like, I'm absolutely sorry for saying that. If there's anybody that does like this movie, for me, it just feels really odd. And part of it is kind of ruined due to the fact that Kong's reactions towards Duan just feel really creepy at certain points and just really odd. And honestly, like, I just don't know how to feel about some of this. And I understand in some of the earlier King Kong movies, like the original one, that yes, there was that scene where he was kind of like fondling her and kind of removing her clothes. But here, it's just weird. I mean, I'm sorry. It's just hard getting past how weird it was. And I prefer how the 2005 Peter Jackson King Kong executed certain things when it came to the relationship between, say, Anne and King Kong. This movie, it doesn't execute it as well. I can't get past the odd remarks like this.
I'm a Libra. What sign are you? No, I don't.
Ah, yes. Just Libra things. Fun, tenacious, getting kidnapped by giant gorillas. Kong, you just had to get one of the zodiac sign girls, did you? And we do have this moment where he goes ahead and gives her a bath, but I'm sorry, but does anybody want to be air dried by a gorilla's breath? I mean, I know this is supposed to be wholesome, but it just flops for me, and I'm sorry, it's just really odd. I will say I could go ahead and appreciate how Kong's cheeks and the mouth movements of him, you know, kind of breathing and kind of blowing the air, but overall, though, just one of those things. It just feels like a job at this point getting to this movie. It doesn't feel like the epic journey, and we're still waiting. We're still waiting for the iconic T-Rex. There will be a T-Rex, will there? Will there? Wrong! Dinosaurs are not in the budget! No Tyrannosaurus Rex, no Brontosaurus, absolute no fucking creature from the Mesozoic era. You're kidding me, right? This is like Godzilla with no atomic breath. Fuck. What we do get more is more creepy moments between Kong and Duan, and he ends up just kind of undressing her and taking off her top. And I do understand Kong doesn't really know what he's doing, he's just kind of just playing around with her, but she looks so uncomfortable and just listening to her sound effects. It just is really odd and just kind of awkward to sit through as a viewer. And I gotta say, again, I will go ahead and reiterate, I prefer how it was done in the 2005 movie, because in that movie, at least Anne kind of understood after a certain point, after she tried running away and escaping, she realized that, wait a minute, King Kong, he's the king of his own domain, but he's lonely. He tried to defend me, he fought off multiple V-Rexes and just to defend her. He was even willing to let her run off at one point, but then after that eventually came back for her once she was in danger. Really, in a nutshell, is bad writing in this movie that goes ahead and just kind of pollutes it. That's what kind of holds this movie back for me. Eventually, a snake shows up, and it kind of goes towards, Duan, but really, though, I'll be honest, I don't think the snake even realized that she was there in the first place, till eventually, she was kind of in his path. This snake, I'm pretty sure that he probably wanted to make a meal out of Kong in the first place, so really, it just doesn't seem like it's really organic. I mean, really, this is probably the highlight of the movie, and the only battle sequence we're gonna get, and the only action, the most action, and really, no dinosaurs at this point. We get a snake, that's it. So Kong is captured eventually, and he is taken to the mainland and put on for show to make money off him, because obviously he's going to be the big attraction, the eighth wonder of the world. So they go ahead and keep this classic staple in the movie. This movie goes ahead and just kind of follows the original movie, but with changes, and like I said earlier, we are now in a modern 1976, but one of the big things about this movie, you would expect right here this might be where it might turn up, and a little bit, kind of, it does a little bit. But the issue at hand, though, is we have one of the big problems with this movie that kind of hindered probably the reason why we didn't see no dinosaurs in this movie. Because we had this giant animatronic, which is absolutely useless, and has maybe like 15 to 12 seconds of footage. And guess how much this thing cost? $1.7 million is how much this thing cost. 20 operators it took to control this thing, and it was a little over 40 feet tall. I gotta say, impressive for anybody that worked on this thing. It was one of the tallest things at the time being that was created for a movie. But honestly, when you think about it, it's kind of useless due to the fact that it barely got any screen time. And if you think about it in another sense, we could have had a dinosaur in this movie. We could have got maybe some stop motion in this movie, possibly, but that just didn't happen. It sucks Ray Harryhausen couldn't be involved in this movie. I mean, he was involved with Clash of the Titans, which came out 5 years after this, and that movie was under less of a budget than this movie. But you know what, we got King Kong with a giant crown on his head at least. And can you imagine being one of the guys or anybody on the team that's told, hey, you're going to be tasked today with putting a giant crown on an unconscious gorilla? That's an interesting day at work, I gotta say. You won't forget that. Of course, Kong gets loose and he goes ahead and sets after Jack and Dwan. And just when you think our characters are getting to safety, guess what? Conveniently, when the movie calls for it, their IQ just drops because we have this scene.
Jack! Buy me a drink, will you?
Probably some National Guardsman ran his tank into the powerhouse.
What the fuck, guys? Escape the city! Why assume that some idiot ran into a power source and you know damn well there's a giant gorilla that's determined to recapture Dwan? You feel like you gotta get a drink because she wants it and she whines and you go ahead and do it? You don't notice this whole entire place has been evacuated? Stupidity at its best, and plus, you're like, huh, this looks familiar. I mean, well, you know, after that he decides, hey, you know what, I gotta make a call because I know where I've seen this scene at. I saw it in Kong's lair. It literally looks just like the rocks that we saw inside his lair, the Twin Towers, so chances are he's gonna go ahead and come towards here. But I'm gonna go ahead and leave Dwan alone real quick while I go ahead and make a phone call to tell him that I know where he's heading, and then decide maybe he'll get out. Stupidity. Stupidity at its finest in this movie. And then the situation goes from bad to worse, because now he's got a girl.
Girl? You mean like a girl back home?
He's got a girl, and it's just gone on too long. Her parents don't like it. He doesn't have a job. He has never been in the service.
Rather than the Empire State Building, King Kong takes to the Twin Towers. I don't find this to be a problem, really. I mean, they found a reason for King Kong to scale the Twin Towers rather than, you know, the Empire State Building. They didn't go with the fact that, yeah, it's just the biggest building now in New York City, but they went ahead and found a reason to have King Kong go up it, kind of connecting it to his lair. So I want to go ahead and applaud that. Despite all the negative I've said about this movie, I'll go ahead and say that that's something good that they've done in this movie. But when you know it, I think you know the outcome of this. King Kong gets shot up, he falls to his death because of the girl. The end of movie. King Kong 76 is a movie of some correct for its time, but it's just a mess to kind of get to the end of it. It's like GTA, watching the AI of the paramedics ambulance drive over 5 people just to save that one guy that got shot at by a gauntlet gun and set on fire. Yeah, you're kind of creating more of a mess than actually doing good at this point. If anything's done well, I gotta say the special effects hold up pretty well and pretty decently, and there are some great shots, nature shots in this movie, and overall it kind of does give you a nice little vibe, especially when you're on the island. I feel like that's probably the most memorable parts of it. Next, the soundtrack itself, which John Barry, you absolutely carried this movie as far as soundtrack goes. Like, the soundtrack for this movie is so damn memorable. It is one of the best. The King Kong suit also is pretty damn good, and I'm not gonna be biased and say that the Godzilla suits in the 70s were better, because this was technically miles ahead of the Godzilla suits in the 70s, due to the fact that there was more of a budget and more time invested into it than, say, like the Godzilla movies, which I believe the Godzilla vs. Megalon one, which allegedly took a week to create. But it fails to deliver on a memorable journey, dubious characters, no dinosaurs, creepy at points, and this movie just feels like at certain points it just needs a laugh track.
2, the island is uninhabited.
And at other points, it really feels self-aware.
He's taking her.
Someone's taking her.
Who the hell do you think went through there? Some guy in an ape suit?
Regardless of my take on King Kong 76, it did manage to become commercially successful enough to spawn a sequel, titled King Kong Lives, which came out a decade later, which that movie I have never seen. However, though, I'll go ahead and be watching it for the first time ever after I review Godzilla Returns, which is the next movie. So after we do Godzilla Returns, we will go back to King Kong just for a second before it should be Godzilla all the way until 2005 when we get back to the Peter Jackson King Kong movie, and then think you know the drill from there. So join me next time because we're ready to get back into Godzilla because the Heisei era is beginning. You have a good one.